summer morning in August of 2018, the peaceful suburban streets of Frederick seemed no different from any other day. The neighborhood of Saratoga Trail was the kind of place where families built their lives. Children played outside on bicycles, neighbors greeted each other with friendly waves, and rows of neat houses stood beneath the wide Colorado sky. It was the image of stability and comfort. But behind the door of one of those homes, something deeply disturbing had happened. Something that would soon shock the entire nation and leave a community searching for answers. This is Avalor. Subscribe for deep documentary storytelling. Now, let's begin. Inside that house lived a family who, from the outside, appeared to have everything. The home belonged to Shanann Watts, her husband Chris Watts, and their two daughters, Bella and Celeste. For years, their lives had been shared online through photos and videos that showed birthday parties, family dinners, and everyday moments of laughter. To thousands of people watching from afar, the Watts family looked like the picture of happiness. But sometimes, the most troubling stories hide behind the most ordinary appearances. The story that would soon unfold began quietly on the morning of August 13th, 2018. When friends and family members tried to contact Shanann, something felt wrong. Her phone was not answering. Messages went unread. For someone who regularly shared updates online and stayed in constant communication with friends, the sudden silence was alarming. Soon, concerns grew stronger when it became clear that Shanann had also missed a scheduled medical appointment related to her pregnancy. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy the couple had planned to name Nico. By midday, worry had turned into urgency. A close friend drove to the Watts home to check on her. When she arrived, she noticed Shanann's car still sitting in the driveway. Inside were the children's car seats. That detail alone raised immediate concern. If Shanann had left the house with the girls, she would never have left their car seats behind. Something was clearly wrong. Authorities were soon contacted, and deputies from the local sheriff's office arrived to perform a welfare check. When they knocked on the door, no one answered. But the house didn't appear abandoned. The car was there. Personal belongings were still inside. Nothing suggested that Shanann or the children had left voluntarily. As investigators began asking questions, attention naturally turned toward the one person who should have known where they were: Chris Watts. When Chris arrived home that afternoon, he appeared calm, though slightly uneasy. He told officers that he had gone to work early that morning and that when he left the house, Shanann and the girls were still home. According to him, there had been a discussion about their relationship before he left, but he insisted that when he walked out the door, everything seemed normal. Chris allowed officers to enter the house and search for clues. What they found only deepened the mystery. Shanann's phone was still inside the home. Her purse was there as well, along with medication she needed daily. These were items she would never leave behind if she had planned to go somewhere. The situation quickly escalated from a welfare check to a missing persons investigation. News of the disappearance spread rapidly across the community. Neighbors began discussing what they had seen, trying to remember anything unusual from the previous night. Soon, one neighbor mentioned that his home security camera pointed directly toward the Watts driveway. Investigators reviewed the footage carefully. The video showed Shanann arriving home around 2 in the morning after returning from a business trip. She walked slowly up the driveway, carrying a bag, and entered the house through the front door. After that moment, she was never seen again. The footage also showed Chris later that morning loading items into his truck before leaving for work. The movements appeared somewhat unusual. Investigators watched the footage repeatedly, analyzing every detail. At first glance, nothing seemed dramatically suspicious, but the more detectives examined the timeline, the more questions began to emerge. Within days, the case had drawn national attention. Television crews gathered outside the Watts home. Reporters covered every development. And during one interview, Chris Watts stood outside his house speaking directly to the cameras. He asked for his family to come home. He said he wanted his daughters back. He pleaded for anyone with information to contact authorities. To viewers watching across the country, his words seemed strange. Some noticed his body language appeared detached and emotionless. Others thought he simply looked nervous and overwhelmed. But investigators were already beginning to suspect that something far darker was hidden beneath the surface. To understand what happened inside that house, detectives began reconstructing the weeks leading up to Shanann's disappearance. During the summer of 2018, Shanann had traveled with Bella and Celeste to visit relatives in North Carolina. The trip lasted several weeks, giving Chris time alone back in Colorado. During that time, his behavior had changed dramatically. Unknown to Shanann, he had begun a relationship with a co-worker. While his family was away, Chris had been living a very different life. He spent evenings going out to dinner, watching movies, and exploring a new relationship that made him feel as though he had a fresh start. For the first time in years, he was imagining a future that did not include his wife and children. When Shanann returned home in early August, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. Their conversations became tense. Text messages between them revealed her growing concern about the distance she felt from her husband. She asked him repeatedly if he still loved her. Chris responded with short, distant answers. The emotional gap between them was widening rapidly. Friends later recalled that Shanann felt confused and worried about the state of her marriage. She believed they were going through a difficult phase, but still hoped they could work through it. Chris, however, had already begun imagining a completely different life. On the night of August 12th, Shanann returned from another work trip, arriving home in the early morning hours. She had been traveling for a business conference and was exhausted from the journey. Security footage confirmed her arrival shortly before 2 a.m. Inside the house, her husband was waiting. What happened next would only become clear later, after the investigation uncovered the truth. According to Chris's later confession, an argument took place that night about their failing marriage. Shanann confronted him about the emotional distance she had been feeling for weeks. The conversation became heated and painful. During that confrontation, Chris claimed he strangled Shanann. The attack happened inside the very home where their daughters slept nearby. Afterward, he placed her body in his truck, but the tragedy did not end there. In one of the most horrifying aspects of the case, investigators later learned that Bella and Celeste were also killed that morning. Chris then drove away from the neighborhood before sunrise, heading toward an isolated oil field where he worked. It was there that he attempted to hide what he had done. As the investigation progressed, detectives began noticing inconsistencies in Chris's story. His timeline did not match the evidence. His emotional responses seemed rehearsed and unnatural. Eventually, after days of questioning, he agreed to take a polygraph test. The results indicated deception. Confronted with the evidence, Chris finally confessed. At first, he claimed that Shanann had harmed the children and that he had killed her in a moment of rage after discovering what she had done. But investigators quickly determined that this story did not match the facts. Under further questioning, Chris admitted that he had been responsible for all 3 deaths. The confession sent shockwaves through the nation. The man who had appeared on television pleading for his family's return had been the one responsible for their disappearance all along. Search teams soon recovered the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste at the oil site where Chris had worked that morning. The discovery confirmed the heartbreaking truth investigators had feared. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder. By accepting a plea agreement, he avoided the death penalty but received several life sentences without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, the courtroom was filled with grief. Family members spoke about the lives that had been lost and the unimaginable pain left behind. They remembered Shanann as a loving mother who cared deeply for her children and worked tirelessly to build a life for her family. They remembered Bella and Celeste as joyful little girls whose laughter once filled the house that now stood silent. Today, the Watts case remains one of the most disturbing family tragedies in recent history. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden behind the walls of ordinary homes. In the quiet neighborhood of Saratoga Trail, life eventually returned to normal routines. New families moved into nearby houses. Children once again rode bicycles along the sidewalks. But for those who remember the events of that summer, the memory of what happened there will never fully disappear. Because the story of Shanann Watts and her daughters is not just about a crime, it is about the fragility of trust, the hidden struggles within relationships, and the devastating consequences when those struggles turn into violence. And it is a reminder that behind every headline are real people whose lives were forever changed. Even in the most peaceful neighborhoods, darkness can exist where no one expects it. This is Abalor. Subscribe.